It's July 13th, 2026. Welcome to the video. 20% of the entire world's oil and gas just got told it needs a permission slip. That's not a headline from a think tank. That's the President of the United States on Truth Social less than 24 hours ago, announcing that the U.S. Navy is reinstating a full blockade around Iran and, in his words, becoming the guardian of the Strait of Hormuz. And here's the part that's going to make oil traders spit out their coffee this morning. He says we're getting paid for it, a 20% fee, on every ship, every barrel, every container that moves through one of the most fought over 21 miles of water on planet Earth. Let that sink in for a second, because 6 days ago, the same strait was supposedly at peace. There was a memorandum of understanding. There were talks in Oman. Everybody was pretending the shooting was over. And then in the span of 1 week, we've had 2 tankers hit by projectiles, a container ship set on fire and abandoned at sea, over 300 U.S. strikes on Iranian targets in 3 consecutive nights. Iranian retaliation against American allies in 4 different countries. And now the President of the United States saying, out loud, on camera, we're taking over the strait. So today we're breaking down exactly how we got here, what the U.S. military actually unleashed on Iran this weekend, what hardware is sitting in that water right now, and why, if you look closely at who's actually pulling the trigger on the Iranian side, this whole thing might not even be coming from the people supposedly in charge. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand the Strait of Hormuz better than most of the anchors on cable news talking about it right now. Let's get into it. Let's rewind 7 days, because you cannot understand what happened this weekend without understanding the sequence that led to it. Back in late June, there was a genuine sense that this thing was winding down. Iran and the U.S. had a memorandum of understanding on the table. The framework was simple on paper. End the fighting. Lift the U.S. Naval blockade that had been choking Iranian oil exports. Open the Strait of Hormuz back up to normal shipping. And then spend 60 days hammering out the messy stuff, Iran's nuclear program, its frozen assets overseas, and who actually gets to manage traffic through the strait long term. That 60-day clock started ticking last month. It has not gone well. Fast forward to July 7th. 2 tankers get hit by projectiles in the strait, the Qatari-owned LNG carrier Al Rikayat, and a Saudi-flagged supertanker called Wadian. Al Rikayat catches fire in its engine room, bad enough that the crew has to evacuate. Qatar publicly blames Iran. Iranian state media doesn't exactly deny it either, no official claim of responsibility, but the fingerprints are all over it. Less than 24 hours later, July 8th, the IRGC hits a 3rd vessel. That's when Washington's response stops being rhetorical. The U.S. Treasury reimposes sanctions on Iranian oil exports that had just been lifted as part of that memorandum of understanding. And CENTCOM, that's U.S. Central Command, the combatant command that runs military operations across the Middle East, launches its first wave of retaliatory strikes on Iranian military sites clustered around the strait. Then July 11th, Saturday night, this is the big one. A Cyprus-flagged container ship called the GFS Galaxy gets hit, and this time it's not a mine or a fast boat, it's a drone strike, according to U.S. Central Command. 1 crew member goes missing. The ship takes what CENTCOM called significant damage to its engine room. Iran's IRGC Navy responds by declaring again that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, claiming the whole thing kicked off because a vessel tried to use what they called an unauthorized route. That triggers the 3rd round of U.S. strikes in a single week. CENTCOM says its aircraft, ships, and for the first time in this conflict, a mix of one-way attack drones in the air and at sea, hit roughly 140 Iranian targets in that one night alone. Added up across the 3 nights, and CENTCOM says its forces struck more than 300 targets total. Missile and drone sites, naval capability, ammunition storage, communication networks, and coastal surveillance positions. In a public statement, CENTCOM put it plainly, saying Iran had been given yet another opportunity to honor the Memorandum of Understanding and had again failed to do so. And Iran didn't just absorb that. The IRGC hit back, not just inside Iran's own borders, but against American partners in the region. State media reported IRGC strikes on Jordan's Prince Hassan Air Base, with Iran claiming it destroyed a command and control center and drone storage hangars there using ballistic missiles. There were also reported strikes reaching toward Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman, 3 Gulf states that host American forces or have close security ties to Washington. Whether every one of those hit their intended targets is still being sorted out, but the message was unmistakable. If the UNAS keeps hitting the homeland, Iran is going to hit the entire American basing network around it. By Sunday, the White House and CENTCOM were pushing a specific narrative that despite Iran's closure announcement, the strait was, in their words, still open, and that Iran does not control the strait. President Trump did an interview on CNN's State of the Union where he described the U.S. response to the drone attack on the container ship bluntly, saying the U.S. had hit Iran very hard and that there was something wrong with a regime that would blow up a near-finished deal over a single ship. Then, yesterday, Trump went further. In a Truth Social post and in an interview with Fox News, he announced that the United States would be reinstating what he's calling the Iranian blockade, would be assuming the role of, quote, guardian of the Hormuz Strait. And this is the part everyone's talking about this morning, that the U.S. would collect a 20% fee on cargo shipped through the strait to cover the cost of providing security. So that's the 7-day version. 2 tankers hit, a container ship set ablaze and abandoned, 300 plus U.S. targets struck, retaliatory missiles landing in 4 different countries. And now an American president publicly floating the idea of putting a literal toll booth on one of the most important waterways on the planet. Let's talk about why that waterway matters so much that a government would go to war to control it or tax it. If you're newer to this channel, quick primer, because everything downstream of this only makes sense once you understand the geography. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow channel. At its tightest point, the shipping lanes squeeze down to just a couple of miles wide, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman, and from there out to the open ocean. Iran sits on the north shore. Oman and the UAE sit on the south shore. Roughly a fifth of the entire world's oil and a massive share of global liquefied natural gas moves through that gap every single day. There is no practical way around it for most of the Gulf's oil-producing states. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Iran itself all depend on it to get their product to global markets. That's exactly why it's been the pressure point in this entire conflict since the war started back in February. Whoever can credibly threaten to close it, or actually close it, holds leverage over the global economy without needing to fire a shot anywhere else. Shipping data from the tracking firm Kepler shows exactly how real that threat is right now. Just 14 vessels transited the strait on July 12th, down from 24 the day before. That's not a rounding error. That's global shipping companies actively deciding the risk isn't worth it, war risk insurance premiums spiking, and captains rerouting or simply parking their ships outside the strait until this settles down. Quick word from today's sponsor, and then we'll get right back into the hardware because that's the part you're actually here for. So, what does the U.S. actually have sitting in that theater right now, and what did it use this weekend? Right now, there are 2 U.S. Navy supercarriers on station in the CENTCOM area of responsibility, the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS George H.W. Bush. That's a 2-carrier posture in one theater, which is not something the Navy does casually. Carriers are one of the most stressed assets in the entire fleet, and keeping 2 of them forward deployed in the same region simultaneously tells you how seriously Washington is treating this. The Abraham Lincoln's Air Wing is the more advanced of the 2. It's built around Carrier Air Wing 9, which flies the FA-18E and FA-18F Super Hornet, the EA-18G Growler for electronic warfare, E-2D Hawkeyes for airborne early warning, and, critically, the F-35C Lightning II, the Navy's stealth strike fighter, the George H. W. Bush, by contrast, is a legacy air wing, Carrier Air Wing 7, flying Super Hornets, Hawkeyes, and Seahawk helicopters, but without the F-35C. So you've got a stealth-capable carrier and a conventional carrier, both loaded and ready in the same water. Then there's the amphibious side. The USS Boxer Amphibious Ready Group arrived in the region carrying the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, roughly 3,500 Marines and sailors, plus a squadron of F-35B Lightning IIs, the short takeoff, vertical landing variant that doesn't need a full-length carrier deck to operate. Boxer also carries a dozen MV-22 Osprey tilt rotors, which gives U.S. planners the option to move Marines and equipment into contested or damaged airfields fast, if that's ever needed. On land, the U.S. has kept F-15E Strike Eagles forward-based in Jordan at Muwafaq Salti Air Base. These are the same dual-role jets that can run air superiority one day and deep strike missions the next. They've been loaded with a mix of precision-guided bombs and, notably, the APKWS laser-guided rocket system, which is a much cheaper way to knock down a $20,000 to $30,000 Iranian drone than burning an expensive air-to-air missile on it. There have also been F-22 Raptors based in Israel earlier in this conflict, giving the U.S. a stealth air superiority option if Iran's remaining Air Force, what's left of its aging F-5s and other Cold War-era jets, ever tries to contest the skies. And then there's the long-range strike capability sitting in reserve. B-1B Lancer bombers remain forward deployed in the theater. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, flying out of Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, have already been used once in this conflict. That's the same platform that struck Iran's primary nuclear sites back during the opening days of the war in February, alongside a barrage of submarine-launched Tomahawk cruise missiles. If Washington ever decides the current strike tempo isn't enough, that's the next tier up. And it's a tier Iran cannot meaningfully defend against. Underneath all of that, air defense coordination for the entire region runs through something called the Middle East Air Defense Combined Defense Operations Center, based at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, CENTCOM's forward headquarters, and the largest American base in the Middle East. That center links missile defense sensors and intercept systems across roughly 17 partner nations into one coordinated picture, which is exactly the kind of network you need when a country like Iran is capable of launching ballistic missiles at multiple targets simultaneously, the way it did against Jordan, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman this weekend. Now, what did all of that actually do over 3 nights? According to CENTCOM's own public statements, the target set was deliberately narrow and specific. Not regime targets, not population centers, but the machinery Iran needs to keep threatening the strait. Air defense systems, command and control networks, coastal radar sites, anti-ship missile capability, and more than 60 IRGC fast attack small boats, the same kind of swarm craft Iran uses to harass and board commercial vessels, destroyed in and around the strait itself. On top of that, CENTCOM says it has personally redirected 94 commercial vessels away from danger and disabled 4 more while enforcing the blockade, to physically prevent commerce from flowing into or out of Iranian ports. And here's a detail that matters more than it sounds like it should. This past strike wave marked the first confirmed use of one-way attack sea drones by U.S. forces in this conflict, alongside the aerial drones that have been part of the playbook for months. That's a meaningful shift. Sea drones let you hold Iranian fast attack boats and coastal targets at risk without putting a manned aircraft or a destroyer's crew anywhere near the impact zone, and it tells you this campaign is being built for sustainment, not a one-off punishment strike. So when people ask, what did the U.S. military unleash, this is it. 2 carrier strike groups, a Marine Expeditionary Unit with its own stealth fighters, forward-based Strike Eagles running suppression and strike missions, strategic bombers in reserve, a 17-nation air defense network watching the skies, and, as of this past weekend, a drone campaign at sea specifically built to grind down Iran's ability to threaten shipping boat by boat, radar site by radar site. Now, let's get into the part that's actually the headline this week, because the strikes in some ways are the least surprising part of this story. We've seen strikes before in this conflict. What we have not seen before is an American president saying the quiet part out loud about who's going to run the Strait of Hormuz going forward. Here's exactly what President Trump posted on Truth Social Monday. And I want to read this to you because the specific wording matters. The Hormuz Strait is open and will remain open with or without Iran, he wrote, adding that the U.S. is reinstating what he's calling the Iranian blockade, so named because it only stops Iran's ships or customers from entering or leaving, while all other countries get fair and open use of the strait. Then, in a live phone interview on Fox News, he went further, laying out how he sees this working going forward. He described the U.S. as effectively taking over strait security on a semi-permanent basis, floating the nickname Guardian Angel of the Strait, and saying the U.S. should finally get compensated after providing security there for decades without ever being paid for it. Now, is this actually legal under international maritime law? That's genuinely contested, and it's worth being straight with you about that instead of pretending there's a clean answer. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has previously and publicly rejected the idea that any single country can unilaterally charge tolls on an international waterway, stating flatly that doing so isn't permitted under existing international law, a comment he made specifically in response to Iran floating its own toll scheme earlier in this conflict. So there's an open question here about whether the same legal logic the U.S. has used to reject Iranian tolls would also apply to an American toll. That's not a question this video is going to resolve for you. Legal scholars and maritime law experts are going to be arguing about that for weeks, but it's worth knowing the administration's own prior position on the subject before you form an opinion on its new one. Iran's response was immediate and about as blunt as it gets. A spokesperson for Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, that's Iran's joint military command structure, not a random office, put out a statement saying Iran will not, quote, under any circumstances, allow the U.S. to interfere in management of the strait, and specifically warned regional governments that any cooperation with American forces enforcing this plan would be treated as an act of war against Iran's sovereignty. That's a direct threat aimed at exactly the countries hosting the bases we just walked through: Qatar, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait. Iran is essentially telling its neighbors, if you let the Americans use your soil to run this blockade, you're a combatant now, not a bystander. So you can see the trap this creates. The U.S. wants Gulf states to keep hosting the infrastructure that makes this entire strike and blockade campaign possible. Iran is explicitly threatening those same states if they do. That puts Doha, Manama, and Amman in an extremely uncomfortable position. And it's a big part of why you're seeing so much diplomatic activity happening quietly in the background of all this shooting. Because here's the thing, while all of this hardware has been moving and all of these statements have been flying, there is still an active negotiating channel running in parallel. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, met with his Omani counterpart over the weekend, specifically to talk through the Strait situation. Oman, which has quietly positioned itself as the go-between in this entire conflict since the February war started, has reportedly drafted a proposal aimed at managing traffic through the strait in a way both sides could live with. Hess officials have been clear about their precondition here. They've said talks with Tehran can't meaningfully progress until there's a credible guarantee of safe passage for ships in the strait, which is, frankly, a reasonable position on its face. You can't negotiate the long-term status of a waterway while ships are actively getting hit with drones in it. But it also means every time a tanker gets struck, or every time the IRGC declares a fresh closure, that diplomatic clock effectively resets. And that's exactly the pattern we've seen for months now. Genuine progress toward a deal, followed by an incident in the strait, followed by strikes, followed by the talks stalling out again. There's also a maritime security analyst worth mentioning here, Dimitris Maniatis, who's been tracking the shipping data on this closely, has described what he's calling a drastic decline in the number of commercial vessels willing to transit the strait since this latest round of attacks began. That's the real-world economic cost of all of this playing out in real time, independent of whatever headline you're seeing about missiles and toll booths. Every day this drags on, insurers push premiums higher, more shipping companies quietly reroute around the Cape of Good Hope instead of risking the strait, and the cost of that gets passed straight down to consumers at the pump and on store shelves everywhere in the world, not just in the Gulf. Now here's the part of the story I think deserves more attention than it's getting, because it's the thing that actually explains why this keeps happening in this exact pattern. Diplomatic progress, then a sudden attack, then strikes, then more diplomatic progress, on a loop. Every time Iran and the US get close to a real de-escalation, an attack on a tanker or a commercial vessel blows it up. And every time it happens, the pattern is the same. No official Iranian government claim of responsibility, Iranian state media hinting at IRGC involvement without confirming it, and Iran's actual negotiators, the ones sitting across the table from Oman, and indirectly from Washington, left publicly denying they had any part in it. That's not a coincidence, and it's not just fog of war. It points to something structural. Iran's negotiating track and Iran's military track, specifically the IRGC's naval and missile forces operating in and around the strait, do not appear to answer to the same chain of command in any clean, predictable way. You have a diplomatic apparatus, led by people like Foreign Minister Araghchi, actually trying to land a deal through Oman. And you have an IRGC naval command that keeps independently escalating right at the moments when that deal looks closest to happening. Whether that's a deliberate strategy, hardliners inside the IRGC sabotaging talks they don't want to see succeed, or a genuine breakdown in top-down control inside a regime that's been under enormous internal pressure since last year's protest crackdown, is honestly hard to say with confidence from the outside. But either explanation should worry anyone hoping this ends quickly, because it means even if Araghchi and Oman land a perfect deal on paper, there's no guarantee the people actually holding the missiles and running the fast boats in the strait are going to honor it. And that's really the core tension sitting underneath everything we've talked about today. The US is building a strike and blockade posture, 2 carriers, F-35s on 3 different platforms, B-2s in reserve, a 17-nation air defense network that's designed to physically degrade Iran's ability to threaten the strait, no matter who in Tehran is giving the orders. Because at this point, it may not matter whether it's the Supreme Leader's office, the IRGC command, or some faction in between pulling the trigger on the next tanker attack. The American response is going to look the same either way. More strikes on the same target set, radar, missiles, boats, command nodes, until either the attacks stop or there's nothing left in range of the strait capable of launching one. So where does this actually go from here? A few things I'd keep an eye on over the next several days. First, watch the shipping numbers. That KPLR data point, 14 ships on July 12th versus 24 the day before, is the single cleanest real-time gauge of how seriously the market is taking this. If that number keeps dropping, insurers keep raising premiums, and you're going to see it show up in oil and gas prices globally within days, not weeks. Second, watch whether any Gulf state actually pushes back publicly on hosting U.S. operations, given Iran's explicit threat that cooperation equals an act of war. Qatar, Bahrain, and Jordan all have a lot to lose here, and how loudly or quietly they respond to that threat will tell you a lot about how confident they are in American protection right now. Third, watch the Oman channel. If Araghchi's meetings translate into an actual, verifiable, safe passage framework, something with real inspection and enforcement mechanisms, not just another memorandum that gets torn up the next time a tanker gets hit, that's the first genuinely hopeful sign we'll have seen in this specific escalation. And fourth, and this is the one I think matters most long-term, watch whether the U.S. actually tries to formalize this guardian of the Strait toll plan into something concrete, or whether it quietly gets walked back the way a lot of maximalist opening positions in negotiations tend to. Given Secretary Rubio's own past statements rejecting unilateral tolls on international waterways, there's a real internal tension here worth watching play out. That's where things stand as of right now, July 13th, 2026. 2 carrier strike groups on station. Over 300 targets struck in a single week. A blockade back in place. And a president publicly floating a toll booth on one of the most contested waterways on Earth, while his own State Department has previously said that's not legally allowed when someone else tries it. If you found this breakdown useful, drop a comment and let me know what you think happens next. Does the Omen channel actually produce a real deal, or does this cycle right back into another strike wave within the week? I read every comment, so let me know your take down below. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.